This podcast is brought to you by the American Enterprise Institute.
If you like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, review, and share.
Thanks for listening. Here's our show.
What in the hell's going on?
What the hell is going on?
What the hell is going on?
I don't know what the hell he's talking about.
You don't have to know what the hell is on it.
What the hell's the matter with these guys?
We don't know what's going on.
What the hell's going on?
Who in God's name knows what it's all about?
Hi, I'm Danielle Pletka.
And I'm Mark Thiessen.
Welcome to our podcast, What the Hell is Going On? Mark, what the hell is going on today?
Well, what the hell is going on is we're exploring one of the reasons why AI is so awesome, which is we all disagree and we write about it. So I went to Mar-a-Lago and interviewed Donald Trump. And one of the things I did...
You hadn't mentioned that.
Yes. One of the things I did in that conversation is I explored, I was very intrigued with a policy proposal he's put forward, though not talked a lot about, which is that he wants to give a green card to every foreign student who comes to America and finishes either a 4-year or 2-year academic institution in the United States. There's about 1 million foreign students in America every year. That's a heck of a lot of green cards. And that's a very vigorous policy of support for legal immigration. And so I wanted to explore that with him. And so I talked to him. I had an extended conversation with him about legal immigration. I asked him to share his family's immigration story. He told me about how his father came over as a 5-year-old with his grandfather to Alaska to join the gold rush and started building hotels, which kind of presaged where he would end up being. Instead of searching for gold, he built hotels for the people who were searching for gold. His mother came from Scotland and loved the Queen, but became a proud American. And that he's a supporter of legal immigration. I asked him, do immigrants make America better? And he said, yes, they do. So we had an interesting conversation about his proposal and all the rest of it. And then our colleague Mike Strain wrote a piece in National Review explaining why I was wrong and why Donald Trump was not, in fact, a supporter of legal immigration, and that he would probably reduce legal immigration, and cited a number of reasons why. And then our colleague Ramesh Ponnuru wrote a piece responding to Mike, which basically mediated between the two of us and said that he's actually probably more of a supporter of legal immigration than Mike suggests, but who knows what the hell Donald Trump will do when he's president, if I'm summarizing these things fairly. And so we decided, let's bring them on the pod and talk about it.
Yeah, we really cover everything. I mean, I don't want to put in any spoilers, but we talk about the Constitution, we talk about birthright tourism, we talk about labor law, we talk about deportation, we talk about pretty much everything. And I mean, you know, I think the problem for me is separating my sentiment about immigration, which is hugely positive like yours is. That's what made this country great. And separating that out from the abuse that has taken place. You know, when I think about how laws that were put in place out of the generosity and decency of the American spirit, when I think about, you know, our asylum laws in that context, and I think about how they have been abused and how they have been ruined, and the implications for people who are genuinely in need, it makes me so angry. And, you know, look, we need to fix this, but this really can be, I hate to say this, contextualized within the entire breakdown of rule of law in a whole bunch of places.
No, I agree with you 100%. Look, I'm a supporter of bringing in refugees into this country who are truly fleeing persecution. My mother came here as a stateless refugee after World War II. If America didn't have pro-refugee policies, I wouldn't be here. But I think that one of the things that's depressing support for bringing refugees into the country is the abuse of the refugee system, and all these people coming to the southern border claiming to be seeking asylum from persecution when they're not. They're economic migrants. And I love economic migrants, but get in line with everybody else. I mean, the people who get more angry about these line cutters are, I mean, don't you hate it when you're like in a line somewhere and somebody cuts in front of you? Everybody hates that. Are the legal migrants who came here, who went through the process, who waited 10 years to get their visa, who went through the hoops to get their green cards, and people are cutting in the line. And it's overwhelming the refugee processing bureaucracy, which should be dealing with people escaping war and famine and all the rest of it, to deal with economic migrants that really should be getting in the back of the line like everybody else. And what you're seeing is in the polls, and we talk about this in the conversation, so I won't give you all the details, but for the first time in 20 years, you are seeing majority support in America for reducing overall immigration levels in this country. Even though majorities still say that immigrants make the country better. I think that's still a consensus position in America. They think we need to reduce the number of migrants in this country. And that is a direct result of the abuse of the system that they're seeing every day, not just at the border, not just on TV, but in their communities, everywhere where these people are showing up.
Yeah, no, look, this is the problem, and this is the problem with everything. This is the problem. Why are people angry about illegal aliens committing crimes? Because they're angry about the fact that there are too many illegal aliens, and they're angry about the fact that we're not addressing crime. This is a confluence of terrible things that are happening, and it puts us in an invidious position. I'm not as confident as you are in Donald Trump, not because I don't think that he means it, because I do think that he means it. I think it is that he doesn't understand the implications of it and hasn't thought it through and doesn't recognize what kind of reforms would be necessary in order to execute the kind of plans that he has. But on the other hand, better that than being hostile to immigration.
Yep, no, absolutely. And I want to play, one of the things that always happens is when he says these things, they always cut out the clip of him saying, I support legal immigration. And so I asked Ben, our producer, to just pull together a few clips of Donald Trump saying how he feels about legal immigration so our listeners can hear that this is something he repeats over and over again. Here's a couple of examples of that.
We have to have a lot of people come into our country. We just want them to come in legally through a system. So we want workers, and we want them to come in, but they have to come in legally. They have to love our country. They have to love you, love our people. I want a lot of people to come into our country, but I want them to come in legally.
You can come into our country, but you have to come in legally.
You graduate from a college, I think you should get automatically, as part of your diploma, a green card to be able to stay in this country.
I mean, so Danny says it all the
Right.
time.
No. He clearly means it. This is clearly something that he's thought about. And you know what? Insofar as it is the kind of consistency one looks for, hey, good for him. I don't believe he's going to be able to deport all those people, but what the hell? But let's go to the conversation.
Let's try. Let's give it the good old American college try.
Let's give it the Obama try. So, as Mark said, both of our guests are colleagues of ours at the American Enterprise Institute. Ramesh Ponnuru is, I'm sure, known to everybody on this pod. He's a non-resident senior fellow at AEI. He studies politics and public policy, and he really focuses actually on the future of conservatism, but he's extraordinarily knowledgeable on these questions about immigration, and that's why we were so happy to have him. He's also the editor of National Review, which a few people have heard of, and he's covered national politics and public policy there for 25 years. Also, like Mark, he's a columnist at the Washington Post. Mike Strain, who we always refer to as Strain, some people must think we're really obnoxious, is the Director of Economic Policy Studies and the Arthur F. Burns Scholar in Political Economy at AEI. He's also the Professor of Practice at the McCourt School of Public Policy at Georgetown. He's a research fellow with the IZA Institute of Labor Economics. He's a research affiliate with the Institute for Research on Poverty. What the hell is he doing? He has like 16 jobs. And he's a member of the Aspen Economic Strategy Group. He's also a columnist for Project Syndicate. Damn, Strain. What are you doing at AEI? Do you have any time for us?
Here's our interview. Ramesh and Michael, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks.
Great to be here.
So great to have you both here. So this is what I love about the American Enterprise Institute, which is that one of us writes a piece and another, Michael, writes a piece responding to it, telling me how I am dead wrong. And then Ramesh weighs in and explains how Michael is wrong. And so we thought, why don't we do this in a more fulsome manner by having a conversation on the podcast? So thank you both for coming on.
The competition of ideas is fundamental to a free society.
It is indeed.
I think what Mark is trying to say is, we got sick with Danny and me and a regular guest talking about Mark, so we needed to bring in two other people so that we could talk to each other about Mark.
About why Mark is wrong.
Well, I don't always agree with Mark, but let's go. You asked the question, Mark.
Strain, you get the floor because I wrote this piece. Obviously, we'll talk about it. We talked about it in the intro, but I wrote a piece basically saying that Donald Trump. I visited Donald Trump in Mar-a-Lago, and I wanted to get another side of him and talk to him about his views on legal immigration. And he made the case to me that he is, in fact, in response to my questions, not necessarily he didn't bring it up, but I dug it out, that he's a big supporter of legal immigration. And you look at the record and you say, not so fast.
Yes, that is correct. I think a point that I omitted that Ramesh injected into the debate in his response to me was that it's kind of tough to know what President Trump supports as a general matter because he can change his mind and there's more fluidity there than with many presidents or former presidents. But when I look at the Trump record, the highest profile piece of legislation he supported was the RAISE Act, which would have cut in half the number of legal immigrants. On the executive action front, he did many things that made it harder for legal immigrants to remain in the United States, that made it harder for people to come here legally. Administrative things like forms and processing times and that sort of stuff.
Which we've done away with in the last 4 years.
Yes.
It
is now much easier to come to the United States.
You just have to get in a plane to Mexico City and drive up to the border.
There's an app for that.
And I think, we also while perhaps, and I'm anticipating Ramesh again, while perhaps not directly relevant, I think it's certainly indirectly relevant and quite indirectly relevant. President Trump is not effusive with praise about the role of immigrants in American society, and so add it all up, and my guess is that if he were back in the White House, he would do kind of what he did the first time around, which is try to reduce legal immigrant inflows.
Ramesh?
So we have some disagreements here. One is the question of how to characterize Trump's stance, but then we might have like a cross-cutting disagreement as to what our actual policy should be, where I think Mark and Michael at least are for higher levels of legal immigration. I don't know where you are, Danielle, and I am not for a higher level of immigration. But to go back to the question of where Trump is at any given moment, it is true. Not only did he endorse a bill that would have cut legal immigration, I think so, in at least some sensible ways, right? Getting the diversity lottery, for example, which is sort of a confession that you don't have a serious immigration policy and you have to tack this thing on top of it. He not only endorsed that legislation, his White House put out a veto message saying he would not reach any deal on immigration, including funding for his vaunted wall on the southern border, unless it included that cut in legal immigration. That blew up the whole thing, or at least was one of the things that blew it up, because he didn't have nearly enough support in the Senate, even among Republicans. He hadn't really campaigned on it. He hadn't built any support for it. So it goes down in flames, but it prevents there from being any funding for the wall that was supposedly his top priority. Then a year later, he gives a State of the Union address where he says he wants higher levels of legal immigration. He wants record levels of legal immigration. And he later tells two reporters who were doing a book on immigration, he never really liked the reduced immigration part of the legislation that he had endorsed. Well, reduced legal immigration was the entire bill. I don't know how you can come up with a coherent Trump consistent position on this issue, because you'd have to be coming up with it. He doesn't have one.
So I think you asked a really important question, Ramesh. And yes, I am a big fan of immigration. I'm a big fan of legal immigration. I think immigrants make this country great, she said to you, as the immigrants on this screen. But I really do think the more important question is actually, what is the right place to be? Because you can find a policy that Donald Trump has either rejected or embraced on pretty much any part of the spectrum. And maybe not in the last 5 years, but certainly in the last 20 years. The guy's been a Democrat, he's been a conservative, he's been a Republican, he's been pretty much everything. So For you both, Mark has been pretty laudatory about Donald Trump's desire to give people who graduate from American universities a shot at staying in the country and otherwise clamping down on illegal immigration. I do think Trump doesn't understand quite how it is that people get visas to study in the United States. And if he understood that better, and I'm happy to explain it if somebody doesn't understand, but if he understood that better, I think he would be less enthusiastic. That process would also need to be reformed. But what's the right policy here? What actually is the right policy, especially understanding that our birth rate is plummeting?
I'll jump in there since I weighed in last time. I think that we should split the question of how many immigrants we should take from the question of how we select the immigrants we take. And on the question of which immigrants we take in, I think that our current policy is much too much oriented towards reuniting extended families and not enough towards recruiting people with the skills that our country needs. If we had more high-skilled immigration while keeping the total amount of immigration steady, I think that would be a fine improvement in our immigration policy. The reason I am not enthusiastic about raising immigration levels is that I do worry about assimilation. I do worry about our country's absorptive capacity for a number of reasons, having to do with the welfare state, having to do with our lack of self-confidence in assimilating others. And I also worry that having too many legal immigrants, particularly low-skilled legal immigrants, makes it harder for the ones we do let in to succeed and make it. And I think Mike might even concur with this. The evidence is not good that immigrants depress Americans' wages, but there is evidence that immigrants depress other immigrants' wages. And that retards assimilation.
Strain, do you agree with Ramesh?
I certainly agree with Ramesh that the number of green cards the United States issues each year should be treated separately from the kind of composition of who gets those green cards. I agree with I think the thrust of Mark's writing on this, or I guess I agree with President Trump that a version of giving foreign-born graduates of U.S. universities a green card strikes me as a no-brainer. Danny, I think your concerns are well taken, and so you see kind of various forms of this proposal. So some focus on graduates in a science, technology, engineering, or mathematics field. So if you come here and get a degree in art history, you don't get the green card, but if you get a degree in engineering, you do. You see other versions of this proposal focus only on graduate degrees. So if you have a master's degree or a professional degree or a PhD, then you get it. If not, you get the green card. If not, then you don't. And you even see some people talk about trying to be selective about the types of universities. So, if you get your degree,
or not Trump University.
Not Trump University. Yes, that's right. Not Trump University, but universities that are R1 universities, which is a kind of a research categorization designation. Universities where you're really learning skills. So I think if you're take like the most extreme example. If you're a foreign-born student at MIT or Caltech getting a PhD in how do you create a better battery, and you want to be here in the United States, the United States should want that for economic reasons. That strikes me as pretty close to a no-brainer.
Like Mike is trying to back engineer a way not to let the gender studies PhDs in.
Yes, it would be better if just the people who I want could stay. Mm-hmm. But I think that might have trouble with the Supreme Court.
Well, I hate to break it to you, Mike, but Donald J. Trump is actually more open to this form of legal immigration than you are, because he not only wants it to include four-year colleges, but junior colleges, two-year universities. If you come here and you get a community college degree, you should be able to stay, according to him. And what the point he made to me when I interviewed him was that these people come to our country and they are educated, and they have all these businesses want to hire them, and they're not allowed to hire them. And so what happens is they go to Canada, and the Canadian subsidiary of that business goes and hires them in Canada, or they go back to India, and the same company hires them, but they hire them over there, and they get the benefit in those countries of their talent and skill, and their their taxes and all the rest of it. And our American businesses are losing out on a huge, he's a businessman, so he looks at it from a point of view of talent acquisition and talent retention. That this is it's just insane to be producing this, attracting this talent to our country, and then as soon as it's been formed and trained, kicking it out.
I think that's right. I agree with that.
Well, he's right, but of course we do have an answer to that. First of all, if you get a graduate degree in this country or an undergraduate degree, you do have an extra year in which you have a visa to work in this country. It's called OPT. Second of all, we have this stupid category of H-1B visas, not because it's stupid, but because of the way it is administered. So this is something that AEI actually is uniquely privy to, because if you are a for-profit company, there is a ceiling on the number of H-1B or specialized visas you can get for people to come and work here. And those specialized visas are usually taken up by people hiring in the tech world, a lot of Indian nationals. And there is a ceiling on it that is met almost instantaneously. The number of allotted visas are released. And then there's a 501c3 like AEI, which has no limit on the number of visas that we can get as H-1Bs, which is ridiculous because for-profits should be actually allowed to do this. Second of all, you can only do it twice and only for 3 years. It's enormously expensive. I know because we've paid for it at AEI and I've helped pay for it for others. So, this is a reform issue. This is not, in this case, we're talking about reform. I think that's the problem. Trump just doesn't know what he's talking about.
Oh, what? If we're going to disqualify Trump on issues based on not knowing what he's talking about.
Good point.
It have wider implications than immigration.
than immigration.
Was there a question there, Danny?
No, actually, there was just a rant. I've turned into a TV anchor. I'm just gonna talk the entire time and not let our guests speak. Look, okay, fine. Let's ask the really hard question, which I think actually is mirrored in some ways by this conversation, which is, how do the American people feel about this? What do you guys think?
Well, Americans have been ambivalent for a long time on that. There are some numbers, though, that have been swinging back and forth kind of wildly. And those have to do with what's going on in presidential politics. So when Trump was in office, polling consistently showed a swing left in public opinion on, are you enthusiastic about deporting lots of people? Do you want to create a pathway to citizenship for illegal immigrants who are here? Do you think we need more immigrants and so forth? And then after Trump was in office, now that Biden has been in office, and I think in reaction to that and to his policies, public opinion has swung extremely far to the right on that. And there's now, which there never was in the previous 15 years of my following this issue, a majority that says mass deportations now.
To answer that question, Danny, I'll agree again with President Trump. I don't, I'm not particularly, I care more about what the business community wants than the American people on the specific issue of high-skilled immigration. I think Mark's characterization I think President Trump's characterization of what the business community thinks relayed to us through Mark's is 100% correct. They think it's crazy to be turning away ambitious, entrepreneurial, risk-tolerant young people who came here for an education and who want to stay. And I think if a company is willing to sponsor somebody to stay here because they have a business need for that person, and that person is a relatively educated, ambitious person who's able to attract interest from a U.S. company, then we should let them stay, and we should be happy about it. And opinion polls are going to say what they're going to say, but the people answering those opinion polls also like wage growth and productivity growth and income growth and cheaper, better stuff. So we should listen to the businesses. Danny, he's a businessman.
He is.
President Trump.
That's what Mark keeps telling me. It's not that he's a grifter and a showman.
A very successful businessman, I would add. Look, one of the things that I disagreed with in your piece was when you pointed out that Trump's lack of concern about mass deportations of illegal immigrants shows that he's anti-legal immigration. I don't want to. You can phrase it however. I'll let you phrase it however you like if you don't agree with my characterization of the way you put it. But I think the opposite is true. I think the influx, the floodgates of illegal immigration have in fact depressed public support for legal immigration. I think that's the problem. If you look at as Ramesh was citing, but I'll give you the specifics. CBS YouGov poll found that 62% of voters support, quote, a new national program to deport all undocumented immigrants currently living in the U.S. illegally, including 53% of Hispanics. So there's mass support for mass deportations. But the June Gallup poll found 64% still say that immigration is a good thing, but a 55% majority now say they want immigration levels reduced, which is the first time in 2 decades that's ever happened. I don't think it's a coincidence that that's happening in the wake of this massive influx of uncontrolled immigration across our border. Can we even, as three of us here support increasing legal immigration at least, and I don't think Ramesh would support restricting it further than it exists, maybe. But if we all support some level of flows of legal immigration into the country, how can we even have that discussion in a country where we're being overrun by illegal immigrants?
Well, before you figure out what the right immigration policy is, you've got to be committed to having one, right?
Yes.
And being serious about it. And that means that when you've set the rules, you then enforce the rules.
I'm far from the most qualified person on this call to talk about public opinion, but it seems pretty clear to me that the situation at the southern border is depressing support for immigration across the board. And the situation at the southern border is indefensible and, shouldn't be tolerated and is a huge policy failure on the part of the Biden administration. I don't think there's a serious counter-argument to that.
But, it's funny because talking to you all about this, I think Ramesh makes an extraordinarily important point. One of the reasons why I am very pro-immigration, not simply because I'm an immigrant, is because the model that we have, the one that Mark cites in his piece with that wonderful speech by Ronald Reagan, you can go and live in France, but you can't be a Frenchman, but anybody who lives here can become American. But of course, that's no longer true, right? Now you are a fill in the blank dash American, or you are a something qualified gender something this that American. On top of that, of course, we, at AEI talk an enormous amount about the failure of civic education in schools. That doesn't exist. And I think the other point is that when we look at immigration, what we used to see was flows from Europe. We used to see some flows from Latin America. Now what we're seeing is mass migration from places like Syria that are very hard to absorb, that come in for different reasons, and that if it were 100 years ago would probably end up being absorbed, but now aren't. Should that change our minds? I mean, Ramesh, I want to hear more from you about this. Should that change our minds, or do you think we can fix the underlying problem?
I think that there's a lot of changes in the modern context that make the immigration policies of yesteryear, however fondly we remember them, inapt for the present moment. One is the decline of transportation costs. So we had people who came 100 years ago, they were going to come and stay. They were not going to go back and forth. For example, they were not going to be able to continue the ties to the old country in the same way that they can today. And that just creates a change in how assimilation happens in this country. The fact that we had a much, much more deregulated labor market, particularly at the lower end of the labor market, where, you didn't need to get government licenses to get a limited number of occupational licenses for, like a third of the jobs in this country, which is something that we now have. That makes a difference as well. The fact that we've gotten Medicaid, and this brings me to another interesting point, though, which is, Mike, when you were writing about this, you talked about the Trump administration's desire to tighten the public charge rule. That is, to make it harder to immigrate here if you were likely to be somebody who needed taxpayer assistance. as a blow against legal immigration? And my answer to that would be, to the extent it is a blow against legal immigration, it's a sensible one. That we should be looking for immigrants who are less likely to need government assistance. I wouldn't have a hard and fast rule because things happen and sometimes people do need assistance, and you don't want people who have diseases, being untreated in our population. But as a general rule, I do think that that sort of thing should be tightened, that there should be sponsorship requirements, that there should be other ways that we can know, at least as a general rule, that immigrants will be able to support themselves.
Yeah, I think that's a sensible view for sure. And to take an extreme example, I mean, if somebody wanted to come here legally who was born abroad, and we knew that person was going to cost the taxpayers $30,000 a year, but was only going to was not going to contribute any money in tax revenue, and was not going to contribute $30,000 in increased GDP, then that probably doesn't make sense, apart from other kind of extenuating circumstances. I mentioned that policy as one of several measures the Trump administration took to reduce flows of legal immigration, to provide support for the view that President Trump is not a huge fan of increased legal immigration, but the particular merits of that policy, I think, are certainly up for debate.
Well, to support Ramesh's other point about how things have changed, one of the things that has changed over the recent decades is the rise of the welfare state. In earlier waves of immigration, when people were coming here on steamships and not going back and forth, as you mentioned, there also wasn't massive welfare available. There wasn't public subsidies for life that exist today. And so people came here, they came here to work. They came here for opportunity. And I think that there's the rise of the fact, I mean, we just saw new statistics about how much of the rise of the country where Americans are getting 25% of their income from government has spread dramatically. I mean, this is the America that immigrants are entering, where it's just part of life here in America is that you live off the government dole to some extent. Does that make it harder for us to absorb immigrants into this country because it changes the whole composition of what it means to be an immigrant to this country? Whereas you used to come and you provided labor and you got opportunity and you made the country better. Now, if you're getting public support, you can be arguably seen as more of a burden in the balance of burden versus benefit.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's all true. I think it's important not to exaggerate the issue. I think most immigrants produce more than they consume. Increases in immigration, I think, should be expected to increase national income and not to exacerbate the budget deficit or unduly tax the social safety net. Some of this depends on how you do the accounting. So if you think of letting an immigrant into the United States as part of kind of an intergenerational choice, then the case, I think, is arguably even stronger. On the flip side, if you think about immigrants coming in for a short period of time, before they have kids, then the case is stronger as well. I think Ramesh's point about assimilation is an important one. I think about my grandmother who immigrated to the United States from Italy, and they would call the little village in Sicily, once a month or whatever, and the extent to which they had contact with the life they left behind was extremely minimal. And that's obviously very different than being able to FaceTime every day or being able to go back and visit and those sorts of things. How much do we care about that? How important is that? What does it mean to assimilate? Dana, you mentioned we no longer think of immigrants as Americans. We think of them as hyphenated Americans. First of all, to what extent was that true? I mean, I think my grandmother always thought of herself as an Italian American. Is that necessarily a problem? I mean, these are the issues that a healthier public debate would be trying to address in a
It's
calmer
almost a
way.
balance, because it used to be, I mean, my mother considered herself a Polish American, and I actually grew up thinking of myself as a Polish American. But the Polish was always a nod to pride in my heritage, not my national identity, right? I was an American The emphasis was on the American. And so was my mother. My mother wouldn't vote in the Polish elections after 1989 because she was an American, and you don't vote in foreign elections, even though she was very proud of her Polish heritage. It used to be you could be deeply proud of where your family came from, but be fully American. Today, the concern is that people don't feel or are not becoming fully American and jumping into what they used to call on Schoolhouse Rock the Great American Melting Pot that doesn't exist anymore.
Right. So what we've really seen over the last year, for me at least, especially since October 7th, and not just in the United States, right, is these masses of people out demonstrating against values that Americans, frankly, hold dear and supporting terrorism. We see in France that basically there are just terrorist enclaves now. The same is true in the UK. So there's no melting pot whatsoever. And I think that is just a monstrous problem that nobody...
In the U.S., a lot of it's homegrown, right? I mean, that's a problem of college campuses where you don't have enough homework.
It's true. It's true, Ramesh. It's true up to a point, but that's not true in Michigan. That's not what we're talking about when we talk about pandering to Hamas in Michigan. Those are Arab Americans.
Yeah. When I think about assimilation, I think, hanging on to and enjoying your own cultural tradition, that's not something that needs to be stamped out or something that's bad, but part of the process of assimilation will inevitably involve a weakening of that in favor of a sense that we all have a shared sense of belonging as Americans, that newcomers and native-born people alike can communicate with one another, have the same language by and large, and have a sense of shared interests. When I think that the immigration flow is too high or maybe is regulated in a bad way is when you lose that sense. And I think that generally when you have a large percentage of Americans who want less immigration, that's a warning sign that maybe we are straining the absorptive capacity of our country and our culture.
I wanted to ask a slightly different question as well. I'm sorry, you sort of prompted, the conversation prompted like 98 different questions in my mind. I don't know whether you guys know Mike Gonzalez over at Heritage?
Sure.
The frequency with which I cite Heritage has diminished dramatically over the years. But a few years ago, he wrote a book on immigration that was really interesting. And his theory of the case, and you reminded me of it with something that you said, it was either Ramesh or Mike, I can't remember who, was basically, where once upon a time you needed to bring in people for labor, but couldn't really, because of transportation, say goodbye to them. His argument was that when the American immigration system started to fall apart was when we got rid of these agricultural seasonal worker limited work visas. What do you guys think about that?
The Braceros programs. Well, I think that's a complicated question. I think in the modern context, are you going to keep them to 8 months, right? So that they can't have kids while they're in the United States to become citizens and who become, I think the phrase people use is anchor babies, which is maybe not the best of all possible terms. And then you create a problem where can you say, well, the time's up, you have to go, and this kid who's an American citizen has to go too, or you split them up? The other question I think we need to think about is, do we want a model of the American workforce where there's a large proportion of people who we want their work, we want them in our country, but we don't want them to be part of our society. We don't want them to be part of our politics. I think that's unhealthful. I don't think that is like small r Republican way to run our country. It's kind of like a Saudi Arabianization of our society that I would not like to see. So I would say we bring people in that we invite to be full Americans, and we expect them to be full Americans.
I agree with that. One other issue, though, since Ramesh is the one immigration restrictionist in our conversation today, how do we deal with the decline in population growth? So we have a fertility crisis in the United States where we're now we're now growing at less than replacement levels. And the only thing that's stopping us from overall population decline is the arrival of immigrants, who account for about 48% of U.S. population growth. Immigration is projected to be the primary contributor to population growth after 2030. So if we want to grow the economy and we want to get back to, healthy, robust economic growth in this post-COVID era. We've had varying levels of labor shortage since the COVID, lockdowns. We don't have enough workers to fill jobs in this country, and we certainly don't have enough workers to grow the economy at the rates that we want. We pro-growth conservatives want to rate them. How do we do that without robust levels of immigration?
I think that people are concerned about American birth rates for a number of different reasons. Speaking for myself, the thing that really strikes me on that issue is that Americans tend to say they want to have more kids than they end up actually having. And so I think we should look at aspects of our government policies and our culture that are keeping people from seemingly being able to achieve this important life goal in a way that didn't used to be the case in the US. Immigration, pro or con, however much you want it, that's not necessarily an answer to that specific problem. Now, can you use immigration to make up for lower birth rate in the US? Yes, obviously, to some extent, but there are some real trade-offs. One, I think that a country's tolerance for immigration goes down when its birth rate goes down. I think we're seeing that in Europe. We're seeing that in the United States. Two, the whole world is aging. And so, I don't know how sustainable a demographic policy built on immigration is going to be. You look 2-3 decades out, you do have to wonder whether you're going to have severely aging countries competing over a smaller pool. Because, look at our colleague Nick Eberstadt's work. Look at how much China's aging. Look how much Japan is aging. Africa's on a slower trajectory, but it's on the same trajectory. There's, I think, fundamentally not going to be an alternative to coming up with a way that societies can regenerate themselves.
Mike?
I think it's certainly the case that immigration can't be, the solution to this demographic crisis because, we only have one planet, and so if we're pulling in people from Europe. Then,
thank you, Meghan Markle.
Right. Immigration across the globe is a zero-sum issue. But, in the United States, we are the destination of choice for some of the most talented, ambitious, risk-tolerant people who are born abroad. And, a growth policy that is heavy on immigration is an option to the United States when it's not an option to most of the rest of the world, because people still want to come here. And, that is not the same thing as a program to increase the birth rate among native-born Americans, but it certainly can provide the workforce growth that we need to sustain levels of economic growth and income growth that the American people expect. It can buy us some time. It's not an option that's available to most other nations, and it can create, I think, the means to finance some demographic policies. And so, if the U.S. wants to increase the fertility rate among native-born Americans, maybe we want to do a really big, marriage bonus. Maybe we want to do a really big, tax credit for children in their first year of life, or whatever. Maybe we want to pay for everybody's daycare. Maybe we want to, pay for every kid to have a nanny, and the government will pay for it, or whatever we want to do. All the things that or many of the things that people talk about when they talk about increasing the birth rate, those things cost money. And if we bring in more immigrants who produce more than they consume and who contribute tax revenue in excess of their participation in public programs, that'll help us actually be able to do those things.
There's one thing we can do, which is free, which is stop telling them that the world is ending because of climate change. Because apparently that's one of the reasons why young people are not bringing new life into this world, is because they think that why would you bring a child into a world that's about to end?
That's just him slapping back at you.
I do wonder, though, how seriously the people who say such things really mean it. I suspect that if their concerns about climate change were allayed, they'd still be afraid of having kids.
Yes,
exactly.
Probably true.
Kids are scary.
Kids are scary. There's no question about it. But when you have more of them, you can't pay as much attention to their scariness. I want to come back to Donald Trump because we promised Mark that we would come back to his favorite person ever, and that is on this question of deportation. So, I mean, it is a highly, as Ramesh says, when you look at the Gallup numbers, they are wild, right? Now, of course, we know Barack Obama was actually a mass deportation specialist.
Deporter in chief.
Exactly. But I do have a question for people who understand this process much better than I do. Can we actually deport all these people? Is that actually a completely dishonest conversation that is going on? How do we deport them? I saw in Italy, for example, just over the last 3 days, they obviously have a huge immigration problem because of the nature of their border. And so their prime minister, who we like a lot, Meloni, agreed to deport people to Albania. It was a little bit like the British Rwanda system. And the court just said, absolutely not. Oh, and not just said absolutely not, but made her go back to Albania and get those people and bring them back to Italy. I suspect that something like that would happen in our court system too. So explain to me, can Trump deport millions of people?
Well, I think that there are a couple of obstacles to that. And I think you cannot deport 11 million people. I don't think that that's because a Trump administration might not be run with perfect efficiency, although I do think that is true. I just think that it is not the kind of operation that the U.S. government is equipped to undertake. At the same time, deportation can't be a dirty word. It can't be something that you think is in principle wrong, because you have to have it as part of any immigration policy. Even one with more immigration, you have to be willing to deport people who have broken the rules. What I think you could do is, one, ramp up deportation. Start with the people who are already subject to final orders to leave, and find them and get them out. Two, I think if you had a system where employers had a reliable way to find out if somebody they were hiring was here legally, and then was held responsible to only hire people who are legally allowed to be here, then you might have what Mitt Romney used to call self-deportation.
Yep.
Now, that doesn't mean you've got all 11 million illegal immigrants, no matter how long they've been here, what routes they put down, and you've gotten all of them gone. But I do think that you have dealt with a big chunk of the problem, and you've made the problem more manageable.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Danny, you're right that this conversation is at a very high level of altitude that we're having. So, one question obviously is, over what time period are we deporting these 11 or 12 million people? We don't even get to that stage in the
Well, if Trump becomes the dictator that we are being told that he's going to become, of course we have masses of time to do this. But yes,
at some point during his 20-year reign, we'll get rid of all of them, is the idea.
Something like that.
But I think Ramesh is right. We certainly have the capability to increase the number of people we deport. And, I think you have to have, I agree with Ramesh. We need to have an immigration system that involves deporting people in some circumstances, and we shouldn't be afraid to do that. And I don't think we are afraid to do it. I mean, Danny, you're absolutely right that President Obama deported a whole bunch of people, and he should have, and that's that's part of being a nation of laws. I think the concern obviously is that President Trump is not talking about this in reasoned, measured ways. And I think it would be reasonable to argue that the deportation is kind of window dressing to just kind of send the message that immigrants are bad, and illegal immigrants are bad. And I think that is part of what's so troubling about this is the demonization of immigrants,
Illegal immigrants.
The demonization of illegal immigrants.
Leave out that word, Michael.
and look, I think there is always the possibility that a second Trump administration really would try to not just kind of pick the low-hanging fruit of deportations, but to engage in a campaign that's very invasive into communities and that's very invasive into businesses, and that accidentally deports a bunch of legal immigrants, and that separates families, and that therefore creates a chilling effect around legal immigration. That's certainly how President Trump is talking about it, and it's how a lot of people in his orbit are talking about it. And I think it's a major source of concern.
See, that's one of the areas where I fundamentally disagree with your critique, is that that's actually not how he's talking about it. If you listen to him in all of these events, he always says, we have to bring people into this country, but they have to come in legally and they have to love America. And I think that gets at what Danny's problem is with a lot of these people coming in. If you look at the people marching for Hamas around the country, and it gets to where the American people's concerns are. And I think the fact that I don't think his demonization of illegal migrants is causing the backlash. It's the migrants themselves. It's the flood. It's the communities that are being overrun by illegal migrants that is causing the backlash. And the only way you can get back to the country back to a point where it supports legal immigration is by dealing with this problem that has been, intentionally unleashed by the current administration. I hope he does do a very invasive process of finding and deporting these folks. I think one of the things he also needs to do is crack down on sanctuary cities. Just say that if you want if you're a city and you want federal money, you're going to cooperate with ICE detainers. It's not an option. It's not a choice. I mean, I think some tough, measures that I might not support under normal circumstances, and many Americans wouldn't support under normal circumstances, are necessary if you want to preserve this idea of this nation as a country of migrants. I mean, tell me why I'm wrong.
Well, one reason is the linear nature of time.
Take turns, gentlemen.
I'll be brief. I mean, I think President Trump's rhetorical demonization of illegal immigrants, substantially predates the current border crisis. It dates back to, at least 2015, 2016, when he was running for president the first time, and he kept it up while he was president, and since he's left. I in no way defend what's happening with the southern border, and I agree that we need to be more aggressive in securing the southern border than we are.
But you don't believe in corruption of the blood?
I don't believe in corrupting the blood. I don't believe they're eating the pets. And, look, he's talked about, in Colorado, he's talked about how, they've taken over whole sections of the state, and getting them out is going to be bloody. And this is really, I think, very ugly rhetoric, and rhetoric that predates the current crisis on the southern border.
Yeah, first of all, I should say I think it's right that the demonization of illegal immigrants is in itself wrong. I mean, we think that most of them have done something wrong. We think a lot of them, maybe most of them, should be deported, but they are human beings, and we shouldn't talk about them in a way which makes it sound as though they're all criminals, they're all murderers. And he has, I think, been irresponsible in the way he addresses this issue, reckless in the way he talks about this issue. The problem specifically on sanctuary cities that you have is there are limits that as conservatives we all support on what the federal government can tell state and local governments to do. And there are limits that conservatives have fought for in court on what kind of conditions the federal government can put on aid to states and localities. So we had 7 justices of the Supreme Court 12 years ago say, the federal government can't use Medicaid money to force states to expand Medicaid eligibility. A lot of those precedents might come back and prevent us from doing anything about sanctuary cities.
Before we end this conversation, I want to begin where we began before Michael joined us and we were off air, because I want to I've got one area where Danny is more Trumpy than any of us, which is birthright citizenship.
Right. I
Michael
can't believe I
raised
forgot that.
birthright citizenship as his opposition of birthright citizenship as evidence of the fact that Donald Trump is against legal immigration. Danny, you are an opponent of birthright citizenship.
Danny's opposed to the Constitution?
I am opposed to the Constitution, and I think that it should be ripped up if Donald Trump wants to. No, of course not. No, look, I want to be very specific. I oppose birth tourism. I think as Ramesh said in that discussion, I think it's a lot more prevalent than we realize. I think it's a lot more abusive
Explain it,
than
because
we
we didn't-
realize.
no one else
So
heard that.
this is for folks who don't understand. This is, you are a pregnant woman. Yes, I'm afraid I do insist you must be a woman. A pregnant woman coming from another country. You come to the United States. You are allowed to stay legally in this country with, an electronic visa or sometimes even without a visa for 90 days. You have your baby here. Your baby is then born in the United States. You have no intention of staying in the United States, registering that kid if it's a boy for the Selective Service or anything else. You are merely using that birth here to get citizenship, and all too often then using that to bring the rest of the family into the United States for family reunification, and that's wrong. That's what I think. Do you disagree with that, Strain?
Well, no, I guess it depends on what you mean by disagree. If I were writing the Constitution,
Bill Clinton here.
would I include that provision? No, I don't think I would. I don't know. I don't know a whole lot about the history of birthright citizenship, and I think that would be interesting to know.
Ramesh, do you?
I have looked into this from time to time, writing about it, and I was so refreshed to hear Mike say that he doesn't know much about it, because the thing that you find in all of the back and forth arguments is everybody is extraordinarily confident about what the Constitution means on this point, even though obviously the people who are writing the constitutional provision at issue, in the part of the 14th Amendment, weren't thinking about illegal immigration. It wasn't certainly a top of mind issue. And I
there
actually
wasn't
think
illegal immigration back then.
Right.
You showed up and you joined, right?
Right. You just showed up. The border was not as well secured.
PPB had not been founded.
And there's this legal term of art in the Constitution, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, which is what the whole argument turns on, and everybody acts as though, well, obviously that means yes to illegal immigrants' kids, or obviously it means no to illegal immigrants. I just think it's a really tricky question. I do think at this point you would need a constitutional amendment if you wanted to get rid of it. I also think that if we did things like require employers to only hire people who are legally here, you would, over time, really diminish this problem.
Yeah, that's probably, well, look, this is, a lot of this is for want of a nail, the kingdom was lost, because it is a chain reaction of failure to enforce, of willingness to hire, of a desire to exploit, and so much more that creates this unbelievable mess. Luckily for all of us, Donald Trump is here to fix it. And I, for one, thank my lucky stars. Yes, I do. I know. Day one, this will be solved. Woohoo!
Even before he takes office.
He alone can fix it.
He alone can fix it.
Well,
This is why he is our hero.
So first of all, thank you both for writing in response to my piece, and thank you both for coming on the podcast to expand on it.
And putting up
again,
with me
I
and
start
Mark,
where I
who know a
began.
lot
This is
less
what's
about
so
this.
great about AEI. We're all friends, and we all have our agreements and disagreements, and we have this is kind of what the lunch table's like at AEI. So we get to share it with everybody.
Thank you guys very,
Thank
very
you.
much. Really, and thanks for the great work. Take care.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Take care. I just want to end this on a positive note about immigration, because I remain a committed pro-immigration Republican, legal immigration Republican. Our old boss, Arthur Brooks, always used to say that there are millions of people out there who are Americans in their heart. They just haven't gotten here yet. And I think that's the right way to think about it. We need immigrants. We like immigrants. We want immigrants. The reason why I disagree with the immigration restrictionists is because I think a lot of them, I don't think this applies to Ramesh, but I think a lot of them on the MAGA right are viewing things through a European model of conservatism, which is land and soil and all the rest of that. And we have to be a country for American citizens and not for people coming from all over the world. And what makes why I'm comfortable being an American nationalist is because our nationalism in this country isn't built on blood and soil. It's built on an ideal. We believe, why nationalism is a negative force in much of the world is because people believe in the superiority of their race. We believe in our superiority, but we believe in the superiority of our ideas. And anyone can subscribe to those ideas and become an American. And I just think we've gotten away from that idea in a world, we didn't get into this in our conversation, in a world where we're being taught that America is systemically racist and that we're really not a good country and that our ideals are flawed, our founding is broke, that we have to, we can't be a country of immigrants if we don't believe in the American idea. And who wants to assimilate into that? Who wants to assimilate into systemic racism? So we need to restore assimilation and we need to restore pride in what America is if we want to be a country of immigrants.
That's true, although we also need to reject the idea that immigrants are somehow corrupting our precious bodily fluids. If Donald Trump had just said those things about immigration and not said the other things about immigrants, I would be a much happier.
I wrote a column criticizing that.
Yep, and you were right. Anyway, folks, we'd love to hear what you think. Elections coming soon. Oh my God. At least our long national nightmare will be over and we can all move on to
the next national nightmare.
Anyway, I'm sure you all are suffering like we are, but take good care. Let us know your thoughts and thanks for being here.
Take care. Let us know what topics you'd like us to cover. You can get in touch with the show by emailing us at whatthehell@aei.org.
Or you can reach us on Twitter. I'm at @dpletka.
And I'm at Mark Thiessen. That's Mark with a C.
Please rate and review the podcast. If you like the show, please subscribe, share it, comment on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to this.
Thanks for listening.